I just want to welcome everybody to today's lived experience webinar, which is titled Embracing Life with Young Onset Dementia. So my name is Kim McKercher, and I am a provincial coordinator with the Alzheimer Society of B.C, and I will be your host this afternoon. So before I introduce today's guest speakers, I'd like to take just a few minutes to speak about the topic of young onset dementia. So often when we think about a person living with dementia and what they might look like, we picture an older adult, but it's important that people know that dementia doesn't just happen to seniors. So age is the biggest risk factor, but people in their 40s and 50s and even 20s and 30s can develop dementia. If a person develops symptoms of dementia between the ages of 18 and 64, then we might say that they have young onset dementia. So there are more than 50 different diseases or conditions associated with young onset dementia, and some of those include Alzheimer's disease, frontotemporal dementia, Lewy body dementia, and vascular dementia, and that's just to name a few. So like those that experience dementia later in life, people with young onset typically experience a decline in cognition that may impact an individual's independence and everyday functioning. And so you might be wondering, how common is it to be diagnosed with dementia under the age of 65? So we know that currently there are at least 28,000 Canadians under the age of 65 living with young onset dementia, and that it makes up about 2 to 8% of all dementia cases. But by 2050, that number is projected to rise to over 40,000 Canadians. The Alzheimer Society of Canada's recent landmark study spotlights the unique challenges faced by people who are diagnosed with dementia at an earlier age. So receiving a diagnosis is often challenging, as it is more frequently mistaken for another condition. People with young onset dementia are also more likely than those over the age of 65 to experience symptoms that affect language, behavior, and visuospatial skills, while their might be less impacted, which can look a little bit different than how it presents with older adults. And that can lead to a delay in a diagnosis. And then there's also a general lack of awareness among many healthcare providers around young onset dementia. So additionally, people living with young onset dementia are more likely to be actively employed when their symptoms start, and many are forced to leave their career much sooner than they were anticipating, and that can have a significant financial impact on the family. They are also more likely to have children, teenagers, or young adults who they are supporting at home, and often their spouses or partners are also in the workforce, which means constraints on time and energy. We also find that most dementia programs and supports are geared towards people in their 70s and 80s, and that leaves a service gap. So, arguably, those affected by young onset dementia face a unique range of stressors. However, despite those added stressors, this diagnosis does not mean the end of a meaningful and fulfilling life, and that's really what we're going to touch on today. So I just want to bring to everyone's attention that the Alzheimer Society's Canadian Knowledge Hub for Young Onset Dementia has a number of resources and tools. They draw on the experiences and insights of many people, families, and researchers who have been affected by young onset dementia. So some of the things that you'll find are tips on how to get a diagnosis for young onset dementia. There's a free downloadable personal symptom checklist, which can help you track symptoms and start that conversation with your healthcare provider. There's information around managing day-to-day activities, including how to use technology to improve daily life, tools for managing your finances, even downloadable ID cards in case you find yourself needing assistance when out in public. Often people find these really helpful when traveling. We have fact sheets on genetic testing, and there's also a number of resources for kids, teens, and young adults. And that's just highlighting a few of the resources available in the Young Onset Hub. So the link to the Young Onset Dementia Hub is available on the Helpful Resources document that which you'll find in the chat box, but you can also access that information at alzheimer.ca/young onset. Okay, so today we have the opportunity to speak with a family who has been directly affected by young onset dementia. And so it's my absolute pleasure to introduce our guest speakers, Brian, Penny, Ziana, and Shar. So first I'm going to introduce Brian and Penny. So Brian and Penny call Prince George home. Brian worked for many years as an education assistant, supporting several students with disabilities to graduate. Penny has dedicated her career to supporting people living with mental illness as a registered psychiatric nurse. They were beginning to look forward to the next chapter of their life together when Penny began noticing changes in Brian in 2021. So he received a diagnosis of young onset dementia 1 year later in his mid 50s. After grieving, Brian decided to continue living life to the fullest by embarking on a lifelong dream to wrestle competitively in Las Vegas. So that dream came true in 2023, but he didn't stop there. With Penny and his amazing network of family and friends by his side, Brian continues to redefine what it looks like to live with young onset dementia through his love for competing in sporting events and raising greater awareness of the disease as a dementia advocate. So joining Brian and Penny today is Ziana, who is their youngest daughter, and Shar, a close friend of the family who works in the healthcare field as an occupational therapist. So we know that dementia doesn't just impact the person with a diagnosis, but it impacts everybody in their network. And so today's discussion will help us to better understand how young onset dementia affects different members of a family unit and how family and friends can draw strength and support from one another. So I'm incredibly grateful to Brian, Penny, Ziana, and Shar for sharing their story with us today. And I just want to extend a very warm welcome to each of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I'm just going to stop sharing my screen and then we will jump into today's discussion.
Hey.
Okay, so you should be able to see we have Penny, Brian, and Ziana on one screen and Shar on the other. And so Brian and Penny, I'd like to start by inviting you to share a little bit about how your dementia journey started. And Brian, I know you were working in a high school at the time when you first started to notice symptoms. And I'd really like to hear kind of what that was like for you and the family.
Well, initially, my symptoms, I didn't know. I was quite resistant to Penny's suggestions that there might be something wrong. Penny was the one who noticed the symptoms first, and I said that resistant. That's an understatement. I was like, that you are so wrong. There's this. It's anything else but right, and that like Alzheimer or dementia, cognitive difficulty. What are you talking about? Then, as time went on, and I still didn't believe it. And then as time went on, I started making real basic mistakes at school, like losing my way in hallways, mixing up semester schedules, coming into the wrong class, and laughing it off, and still, and then something was up, but still, like, but dementia was not it, and then probably I think it was probably in the spring of 2021 when the first aid test was. That's when it really hit home for me that something was up, because it was a recertification of a first aid course that I've taken many times, and I couldn't do it, and I just wasn't retaining anything, and that was the biggest to me. That was the aha. Okay, something's really up here, and because I couldn't. It wasn't from lack of effort. It was just I couldn't do it. I couldn't retain a thing. And then I came out to the van about an hour after everyone else had left. Then I said to Penny, "Something's wrong," and she 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 again, in her way, confirmed that, yeah, you kid me, like, yes, duh is what she said. Yeah. And so then the gradual process of getting in touch with my GP, and so on and so forth. And
Yeah, so we always use the word blindsided because dementia and Alzheimer's not in Brian's family. So when he first started displaying symptoms at home, which was where's the light switch? And I'm like, we've lived here for 20 years. It's in the same place, with no respect to what he was going through, because I just thought he was not being listening. So eventually, those questions kept happening. How do we put the furnace on? Like, same way we've always done it. But those questions kept coming more and more. And because Brian's done sports his whole life, and these combative sports, we thought it was like multiple concussions. But then, we started, the GP was fantastic.
Yes.
And did the first testing. We were quickly referred to, unfortunately, what was then the geriatric assessment team. Again, for young onset dementia, that's difficulty because we're with geriatric systems when we're not geriatrics or older adults. The testing was done more. It was the psychologists testing who first said that they felt it was Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
And when they told you that,
Oh, what did I say there?
have you
Have you ever been wrong? Like, it's possible.
wrong?
And she goes, no. Okay, and then the psychological diagnosis was verified through the lumbar puncture test for the presence of amyloids, and so that's sort of how we got to the understanding that this was Alzheimer's, early onset Alzheimer's.
So one of the things people always ask us, how do we cope? And initially we didn't.
No.
The bottom line is we didn't cope initially. We talk a lot about, we watched Netflix, ate carbs, and cried for about a month.
Yeah.
And then we decided that wasn't productive. Neither could neither of us gain weight. So we thought we should maybe be a bit more
But we
productive.
tried.
We
But
tried. We tried hard. We tried hard.
Yeah.
So I reached out when we first heard the word Alzheimer's. I reached out straight away to the dementia helpline. I'm known as a stoic woman, as a strong woman in this community, so I didn't feel I could be vulnerable anywhere else, and I needed to be strong for my family. So unfortunately, the poor people on the other line of the phone just got a sobbing wreck of a woman, because that's where I felt I could be vulnerable and ask my questions. So they were like absolutely a godsend to me, because I was falling apart, but I couldn't fall apart at home because the family needed me. So that's where I fell apart. So they put us in touch with the Alzheimer person for Northern BC, Lori at the time, who again was such a resource to us, which is why to this day we support the Alzheimer Society so much, because initially those early days, like I say, we were an absolute mess. We quickly got ourselves counseling. One of the things that happens in the medical system for us in the North, we basically got a diagnosis and said, here's the card for the Alzheimer Society, see you in 6 months. So there was, here's your prescription. So there was no real support offered through the Northern Health Authority, which was unfortunate because that's the time we needed it the most. So it's the Alzheimer's Society that was there for us. At that time, Brian was still working. Yeah.
And my work, the diagnosis was in March of 2022. And I just thought, well, there's no set, to me, I'm a terrible liar. I'm a terrible secret keeper. It's too exhausting. So I just thought, well, I'm going to disclose, right? For me, that was the best decision I could have made. That, right? I let my colleagues know. I let my administration at the high school I was working at know. And I think maybe that forthcoming nature of it really did me well, because they've treated me tremendously, since, all the way through from the last few months. And the reason, and I that diagnosis was in March, and they said, well, do you want to leave now? And I said no, because this young person beside us was graduating in June that year, and I wanted to stay on.
Wanted to stay. So Ziana was at the same high school where Brian worked, and they supported each other through high school.
Yeah.
And when Brian was diagnosed, he wanted to see out the year to see the baby graduate, which he did. So we made the decision to protect Brian's dignity, to get him out of work as quickly as was feasible, with him seeing Ziana graduate. So in mid-June, Brian ended working, which he planned to work forever.
A week after grad,
A week after grad. Brian planned to work forever. He loved his job. But it was, it is and still is all about protecting Brian's dignity and our dignity as a family. So we made the decision for Brian to leave work. We talk as if we're a very solid family, and we are, but I really want to point out to people it's taken us
Wow.
a while and a journey to get to this solidness around the Alzheimer diagnosis. It wasn't like the first month we grieved and then we were like, okay, let's get on with life. Every day we grieve something new, and every day we make an intentional decision to embrace life and make the best we can of what's been handed to us. There's no choice. The other choice is just to curl up in a ball and continue to eat chips and watch crap TV. So we thought that, we wanted to be more productive and started to become advocates, and we continue to do that. Um, I always like to point out, people wonder if Brian getting weepy is new. That's not new. That's
What?
that's not new.
What?
That is not a symptom of Alzheimer's. Uh, Brian writes poetry and is an artist. So I always say when he gets upset, go write a poem about it.
I've always, like I said earlier, what I said about like, I'm the worst poker player ever. If I'm happy, you'll see it. If I'm upset, you'll see it. If I'm, and I'm not ashamed of that by any stretch. Some guys, you know, be a little, oh, you're too emotional. No such thing. You are what you are, right? And whatever. But that again, that works for me, right?
But leaving your job, what was that
Oh,
like
leaving
for you?
that was probably outside of family situations that have been tough. That was the hardest thing I've ever gone through, because that was right. Like my job had its place. It was definitely not as important as of the family, but to me, it was my identity outside the family, and it was incredibly hard to leave. And uh, thankfully, I've had such great support from former coworkers. For the most part, when I say most part, 99.9% of my coworkers were tremendously supportive, and they
Amazing.
continue to be. When every once in a while, I'll stop by the school for an errand or picking up the grandbaby or whatever, and they are very warm to me. So I mean, it's and ask me how I'm doing and ask me how the family's doing,
And the students.
and the students. Yeah, the students that I've worked with, all in their own way have been extremely supportive of it and caring of my situation, and always ask how I'm doing and how Penny's doing and how that, and again, in their way, they're extremely been wonderful to me.
And it had a, financial impact, obviously. We had planned our retirement based on the fact that we both continue working. But that is not what happened. And we weren't financially ready for Brian to stop working, but it wasn't an option. So, I mean, for a lot of people in the later life that who get dementia, that's not the impact for them because they're already set up on their pensions.
Yeah.
But for us, it halved Brian's wage at that time. So you plan and you plan, but it's useless in a lot of respects because you can't plan what you don't know is going to happen. So we've navigated that.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the year after Brian was diagnosed, I myself became ill and had to be nursed at home, which Brian did, right? So we keep swapping roles back and forth, but that's what a relationship is,
Yeah.
is that, one's in charge and then the other's in charge, and one's well and then the other's not well.
I was in charge.
No, you were never in charge. As I said that, I thought, oh, that's right. Yeah.
Well,
But it
It's
did,
on tape. It's on tape.
but it did add the, to the family, all of our family and our friends that are family. It added another element to them. With Brian not working, with us both struggling at the time, and then these decisions that the children had to take care of and our other family members had to take care of, and everybody in our family has stepped up.
Yeah.
It's been beautiful to see, and our friends that are family that we call them have really stepped up.
thank you. Thank you so much for sharing a little bit about kind of how your journey started and Brian, I know how much your work has meant to you and still is so meaningful to you. And so I appreciate you sharing what it was like to leave the workforce before you were ready, before you were prepared to, and then the impact that has on the family. So thank you for sharing. Deanna, I would love to direct a question towards you. And you shared that you were 17 when Brian was first diagnosed with young onset dementia. And you're actually attending the same school that your dad was working at. And we'd just love to learn a little bit about how maybe your relationship with your dad has been impacted since his diagnosis.
I think me and Dad's relationship has gotten better because we still we try harder to make meaningful time rather than we get in fights, we walk to other rooms and then don't talk for the rest of the day. And then I come back and I'm like, okay, I was a kid. I'm sorry. But now I'm like, no, I'm not gonna create the fights that I used to create and stuff like that. And like I do everything I can to minimize our tiffs, but those are always gonna happen because we're so sibling. And I think that that's an important part of our relationship is our disagreements and any relationship, honestly. But yeah, me and Dad just work a lot harder to make better time for each other and time that will actually, or all of us will care about later on, rather than.
Yeah, it's one of those, sorry for it. It's one of those things where Deanna and I we're so personality wise, so similar, so rigid, so, and then we waste so much time, eh? And again, that, you know, that's a lot of the parent teenager dynamic. I mean, um, but now, I mean, she's stepped up tremendously. She's you know, we don't, as she has said so well, we make time to, with the time we make together is good time.
Yeah, like we try to make our utility outings, as I like to call them, because going to the dump is not a fun time. So I I think we try really hard to make our utility outings fun. If we're going to the dump, we'll go take pictures, or if we're going, not pictures of the dump, but pictures of somewhere pretty around the dump, or like we'll listen to our music, and we have like 4 songs that are played every single drive, which have been made into our fun routine. But yeah.
Did you want to talk about your journey and how that changed when Dad was diagnosed?
Yeah. So when Dad was diagnosed, I was going through my own mental health stuff in and out of the hospital like 20 times in 2 years, which I laugh about now, but anyways, that's besides the point. And Dad's diagnosis kind of made it so I had a reason to get better, which is very not silver lining, that's not the right word, but bitter better part of a crappy situation. Is that I was able to get something that motivated me to get better and spend more time with my family rather than with other things and places. Yeah.
And you and Dad have learned to navigate topics that are triggering.
For better. Yeah.
And you've spoken a little bit about boundaries that you've put in and how that's been helpful.
Yeah. we there's like we have really we're so similar, but we have such opposing views on certain things. And we've figured out ways to kind of, okay, let's not talk about that, but talk about that in a like,
Different way.
yeah, maybe rather than I don't agree with you on this and that's how it's gonna stay, we'll be more we'll have conversations about our differing opinions rather than just, yeah, it's just that I think that's more becoming an adult
Yeah.
with you guys.
Oh, I thought I was becoming the adult.
That true.
I think as well, young onset it can be very different for people when there's, children or young adults in the home and we have 4 children, Ziana's the youngest. So we've been parenting for decades. And now we have an adult living in the home with us. But sometimes we find that Brian reverts back to parenting a child. So
Yeah.
we have to kind of re-navigate that, saying, dad is not deliberately treating you like a child. He's maybe forgotten that you're an adult.
Yeah.
And I think to make our little perspective a little bit more niche possibly, but I am also on the spectrum. So with dad going back to his, like, sometimes going back to our childhood rules, I get confused. And I think mom or both of you guys having said the dementia, Brian, and like everyday regular, yeah. I think you guys having said that was very important for me to be able to cope, because having that separation to be able to make that for me.
Yeah. So
So being able
sometimes,
to kind of know when it's Brian, your dad, and when it's Alzheimer's speaking. Sorry to
Yeah.
cut
Yeah.
you off, Penny.
yeah, and I was just going to say, navigating that with, a young adult who is on the autism spectrum, and perceptions can be different. And Brian with Alzheimer's, perceptions can be different. So sometimes they come home and the two of them have a version of what happened, and I have to navigate what kind of did happen. Sometimes I never know, and how to mediate that. So I think as time goes on, we've got, getting better and better at that. And Ziana and I both getting better and better at what is important to navigate and what's important just to move on.
That's been the big,
Yeah.
like, that
Yeah.
was kind of where I was trying to get to, but my words wouldn't go there.
Yeah, no, I understand. And thank you so much for sharing your perspective, Ziana, and what it's like to be, a teenager when your dad was diagnosed and now transitioning into young adulthood. And how do we manage those role changes and family dynamics? It's a big piece of this puzzle and the dementia journey. So I appreciate that. Um, just to elaborate a little bit more on this topic, you mentioned that you have 4 children, and Ryan, you've shared some lovely words of wisdom with us when we were planning the webinar around what's most important to you when it comes to maintaining your relationship with your children and, not leaving anything unsaid. Can you speak to
Well,
that a little bit?
I think that's it. That's the most important thing. Like, because you often hear that, I never had the chance to say this, or, when people are, I never had the chance. Well, I have the chance, so I'm saying it, right? I don't leave things unsaid. Like, I don't think that's a completely Alzheimer's thing. I've always been quite open, but um, but more important than letting them know how I feel, I think it's super important to let them tell me how they feel.
Mm.
Like, are we how are we today? Like, are we like, this happened? What do you think of that? Like, I got this diagnosis. Like, we're open with medical updates and say this is what's going on. Okay, give them time to uh, um, process it, then come back and ask them how do you feel about that? Like, what does that, you know? And then they'll ask me questions, and I'll give them the best answers I can, or they'll go to their mom and they'll, if they choose. So I mean, just open communication, because like I'm so, again, stoicism's great if you're in the movies and you're John Wayne, but I mean, like in real life, you need your family. They need you. They still need you. I know that.
Yeah.
And I don't, I don't want them. I don't want, if there's a legacy to be created, I don't want it to be, dad took it like a man. No, no, to hell with that. Like, I want them to know how much I love them. I want them to know how much I care for them, and I want to know how much that feeling is reciprocated. That's the most important bit.
I think the only person we protect from the information is, we have two grandchildren.
Yeah.
One is 13, so they're able to process a lot of it, but the baby grandbaby is 10. And so that's a more protected conversation that we have with that child.
Right, it'll come.
It'll come.
It'll come, yeah.
But they're both figuring out, I think, that you guys, that there is something.
Yes.
Yeah.
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 Can I ask, does the 13-year-old ask you many questions about
Yes.
dementia?
Yes.
Okay.
We have a semi-regular date. We go to the pro wrestling shows when it's in town. And so we
Nice.
go out for a sandwich or whatever, and when we're talking, we're having dinner. They'll pop in questions, or when we're walking to the event from where we're at, questions get asked. So they're not in depth and medical and technical questions. They're just like, how are you? Do you do this? Do you do that? Like things she sees and hears, she just wants to correlate it to what's going on with me. So in her terms, she's quite, that's how she does it with me. I don't know if she has any discussions with you or you.
I was about to say, can I, with the 13-year-old specifically, I think something that I've with her, she comes and talks to me a lot, and will ask me questions, and I'm like, maybe ask grandpa, because I don't always, some of the questions that she's asking is more, how, what's going on in your brain? Like, those are the types of questions that are being asked. And also with her, the 13-year-old one, they'll social media and access to the internet, I think, in the younger ages has been a big resource for them.
Yeah. I think too, it's important to note that the 13-year-old grandbaby Nicola goes to the same high school that Sienna went to and that Brian worked at. So she hears about her grandfather when she's at school, which can, be a fantastic thing, because she doesn't know working grandpa, right? She knows grandpa. So she gets all this feedback from the other teachers and other students that are at the school, and then comes back to, and it initiates that conversation. What was it like when you were working, grandpa? And I'm at that high school. Do you know this guy? And so that's been a kind of a generational. We're at the same school still, right? So that's kept Brian linked into where he was working.
Yeah, and it speaks to the importance of community connections and maintaining those relationships, and can be incredibly helpful just to have that broader support network around you, and people that knew you, Brian, when you were teaching and doing something that you loved. So, well, thank you.
It's good.
Yeah. Thank you for telling me a little bit about those relationships and how you maintain those conversations. I think a takeaway from what I'm hearing is that disclosing your diagnosis was incredibly helpful and empowering to you, and that you just leave the door open to ask questions and to keep people up to date on how you're doing and what's going on medically.
And in everybody's life, if they choose to disclose, you take a risk.
Yeah.
And there's always going to be somebody who is not supportive, or, asks Brian, is he allowed to be out alone at the gym? Or, questions like, I don't really see it. I think you're making it up. That was a fun one, which we took as a compliment. If you don't see it, that's a compliment then.
Right.
But we navigate that, Brian tactfully and me not so tactfully, between us.
Yeah, but by and large, the response to the diagnosis and all these things that we're doing for awareness, they've been overwhelmingly positive. I mean,
Generally.
Like I said, 99%.
Yeah. And so kind of on that trend, we do hear from many families that they lose some friendships after a dementia diagnosis. And we've particularly heard this from people that have been impacted by young onset dementia. And I think there's a number of reasons why that may take place. And some of that is because they're just in a very busy time of their life where they're actively working, they're raising kids, and often chronic illness isn't something that they're relating to. They don't know how to respond and they don't know how to talk about dementia. But we know how critical it is that we maintain those social relationships and that we don't isolate ourselves. And so I want to talk a little bit about friendship and how important that is. And Shar, that's where I'm going to direct a question to you to tell us a little bit about your friendship with Brian and Penny and what it's meant for you to be a key part of their support network after Brian's diagnosis.
Um, yeah. I've always, we've always been quite close with the family and that. Um, we've all kind of gone through a lot of hard times, together since we've known each other and helped each other, through those times and that. And I think this is just another progression of that, right? Like we're just kind of going with what's, kind of coming along and trying to do the best with what you have and that. And, I have the opportunity to be able to support them in a few different ways. And so it's very meaningful for me to be able to be a part of that. But also, yeah, to know that, they've got support that's out there. And I mean, Brian has always been such a very positive, outgoing, person and that. And so, I mean, I always keep that in the back of my mind as well, too, even when we're doing things and I see a little shift, in him and that. And it's just like, it's just, a little blip right now. And we just kind of work through it. And, but yeah, they're super important people in my life, and I do what I can to try and help to support them, and they do the same thing for me. So
Yay, Shar.
Thank you. And if you don't mind, can you tell us a little bit about some of the activities that you do together? Because it's so important that, particularly after leaving the workforce, earlier than many people would want, that we have purpose and we stay meaningfully engaged. And I know that there's many ways that you and Brian connect.
yeah, we do. I mean, we volunteer together usually about once a week. Um, and so that gives us the opportunity to kind of have a regular time together, and that even though sometimes we're just kind of in passing and that kind of thing. And so that's really, it's that's super meaningful. We do share, like, going to some watching football or that kind of thing. We'll actually go out and watch the Kodiaks play. That's one of the football teams here in town. And go, maybe we've watched the Super Bowl together, and just stuff like that. Regular everyday stuff too, that I know is really super important to him, but I know other members of the family, maybe that's not their thing to do and that. And so, I gave that chance to, kind of do those types of things. I really enjoy going out and spending that time together, especially when we're watching sports and that kind of thing. Brian amazes me with how much he knows and that it's all there. And yeah, and I'm always amazed by how much he's able to also educate me on different things and stuff. And so I really enjoy that aspect of it as well too. And that we have like a banter also, like when we are volunteering and that. And so it's super positive that way as well. So yeah.
I only correct you when you're wrong, sir.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you
No.
so much, Shar. And so, Brian, Penny, and Ziana, what does it mean to have friends and family like Shar and the support of your community when it comes to not only supporting Brian, but supporting all of the family through this?
Well, Shar is a terrific representation of our friends and family. I mean, always there for us. I've got two buds that I've had since elementary school, and they're still around. I pay them well, uh, but there's
That's
there's
okay.
yeah. No, but I mean, like the friends and family that we've had, my siblings have stepped up tremendously. Um, Penny's brother and sisters have been amazing. Penny's mom has been just absolutely my mom. Like she's just, I don't know what, you know. Um, and even Ziana's friends, Zenzi, all the friends of my kids, they're all support. Like I, I I just don't understand why I warrant this much affection.
Neither do we.
Neither do they. But I mean, it's been amazing, and again, um, why we're here is because I've got Alzheimer's disease, and that sucks. And they're all standing behind me and assuring me that they're going to be there, which oof is overwhelming.
And it's, for us as well, I mean, Brian has spent his whole life working with people with developmental disabilities, and I spent my whole life working with people with mental health issues. So a lot of our friends also work the mental health field or people with challenges. So we don't only have friends, we have people who have the knowledge as well to understand kind of where things are at for Brian. So we don't have to explain that, which is,
Mhm.
makes sometimes it easier to understand. We also have friends who are resources to us that we can, Char's an occupational therapist, and I'll say, "Oh, hey, help me with this." But a lot of times we don't even have to ask for help. Our friends and our family are there. And it's not to say everything's been, the rose-colored glasses. We've had some challenges. We have some family members who have difficulty spending time with us because they're not used to seeing, the struggles that are sometimes there. We sometimes have to pick and choose what we're going to do for events, sometimes very stimulating uh, environments. If they're too loud, too many things going on, can be more difficult for Brian. We've had to alter how we do our traditions because we're a rambunctious shark and attest to this, having joined our family occasions. We're all extremely loud. We're all extremely fighting to get the center of the attention. So my mom does point out, my mom is extremely eccentric, but my mom does point out that the benefit of Brian being diagnosed is he's now become quite sassy, which he never was before, especially towards me. Right. So my mom is really enjoying the new Brian, who tends to be quite sassy.
Oh, and here's an example. She's going to say "see," but I'm going to say I always have been, but now people just want to hear me.
Now we shut up long enough to listen to what you have to say.
Okay, maybe.
Yeah. But I mean, we know we don't know, but there's a progression with Alzheimer's and other dementias that is clinical, and we are very aware of that. We're very aware there'll be a shortened lifespan for Brian. So how can we intentionally, one is be there for each other, but with also our family and friends, how can they be there for us as we journey through? So Shar goes to a lot of sports with Brian, which I so appreciate because I can't stand it. And I'm so grateful I don't have to take Brian in the future because Char's going to do it. But as things change, Brian, loves to go to sporting events, but eventually he'll have to be accompanied to go and eventually may not be able to go. So how can we maintain that for Brian without me having to do it? So thank you, Char. But we have other people in our lives that are picking up pieces that are more challenging for us. And for me personally, how can I have supports in place to ensure that I can maintain myself the best I can to be there for Brian,
Yeah.
because that's going to be so important that, I get breaks, right? I get to be myself.
That's sorry, but that's what I was gonna say was it's really for me being the kid, like it's really important to me that they both have like mental health type supports, like something there for
Mhm.
because I know that they won't talk to me or their children about it, and that's just because of our dynamic and everything. And to have friends like Shar mainly, but Shar and their friends being there is really important to me as a background character.
But Ziana's sitting at this table because we have 4 children, but Ziana's the one child that lives at home still. So the impact is greatest on Ziana, right? Although it does impact all the children. But
Yeah.
the children have all journeyed along this differently. They're all different people and they've all responded differently and done different things, but always we know if we ask, they're there for us.
Can I just point out, Ziana, I think you said something quite powerful there where the gratitude that you have knowing that your mom has someone non-judgmental there, like Shar, she can talk through those struggles with, because you're right, we often don't talk to our kids when we're struggling.
And I
And
know that they'll
yeah,
say no matter what, we're good. And
Fine.
but knowing that the main supporter has a supporter is so important to me.
it must,
And we,
yeah, take some of the stress and the weight off your shoulders. And Penny, you've spoken about the importance of having that family respite too, that time for you to recharge and heal and just pause, and having friends involved and continuing to engage with the person living with dementia in activities that they love. It also has that added benefit of providing that much needed respite for the family that are supporting them. And so it can be multi-layered levels of support there. Um, so yeah, I really hope that people listening in take away that great value of maintaining friendships, building that support network around you. And if you're a friend or extended family member, yeah, ask what can I do with the individual? What do they enjoy doing? Can I take them to that weekly football game and provide that little bit of break for you?
and I think in these early stages, I mean, for us, Brian was diagnosed very early, but in
Hmm.
these early stages, for me, it really shows who's going to be in our court and in my court as we journey through and Brian requires more assistance. So I know now who's going to be there for me 100% and be there for Brian in a way that's positive for both of us.
Yeah.
We do have one family member who has a voice. How are you today? And we're like, oh, we don't want to hear that. Don't be patronizing. We don't want your healthcare voice in this house. So we know how to navigate that now, and we have a list basically of people that we know who can do what to help us along the journey, because you have to have help. There's no way you could do it by yourselves. Even as a family unit, we can't do it by ourselves.
Yeah. Okay, so Penny, I'm gonna direct a question to you. So you have been quite vocal that you don't see yourself as a caregiver, and I always have to make sure I watch myself when I'm using that word. At this point in your journey, right now, where you're at with Brian, the word caregiver doesn't fit. And so it's been important for you that you maintain a reciprocal partnership for as long as possible. And I'd love just to hear a little bit more about how your relationship has been impacted, and what's important to you in maintaining that connection.
Me vocal? I don't know what you're saying. So I mean, words like caregiver, care partner, are the politically correct words, but I am Brian's spouse. And as I'm losing pieces of my Brian every day, I'm not going to lose my role of a spouse. Even when Brian requires 24-hour assistance from me to survive, I will still be his spouse first and foremost. I also protect myself. I've been a nurse for 40 years, and my role with Brian is not as his nurse. So it's important I maintain the spouse relationship, uh, because to protect myself, I could go clinical and go into nursing role to protect myself from my emotions that are overwhelming. So that's why I'm very clear that I'm Brian's spouse, right? And the tagline is what? We're common law, he's common, and I'm the law. That's the way this relationship works, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
But we've, we're in the early stages, but we've still had a lot of dramatic changes. Brian is the sensitive one, and Brian would never leave this house without kissing me goodbye and never come into this house without kissing me hello. And that's changed because he's forgotten, right? And he's forgotten, but the impact on me is not forgotten. Like I'm very aware when that happens. And it's difficult to process, but so I have two Brians. I have my Brian and I have my Alzheimer's Brian. So my Brian speaks to me a certain way, and my Brian connects with me a certain way. My Alzheimer Brian speaks to me in a way that my Brian would never have tolerated anybody speaking to me. So when it look, I mean, he, but and so we just so you guys know out there, we've had a lot of conversations that we do this advocacy work, and although it's upsetting for Brian, he wants it to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we prepare ahead of time of what's going to be said, and we know Brian's going to emotionally respond. We also know sometimes we have these conversations, and for Brian, it's the first time he's heard it, even though it's not the first time he's heard it. Right?
That's an issue, yeah.
Yeah. So that's something that we've learned to navigate. That Brian and I've had a difficult conversation where he swore at me in public, and we've had that conversation about 6 times now, with Brian being the first time he's heard it. So those are the kind of symptoms that we deal with every day. So I'm everybody who knows me knows I'm a diva. So I wake up to coffee on my nightstand every morning for 25 years, and now I don't. And it's not because he doesn't love me, it's because he's forgotten. But my Brian would not have forgotten. So I have to process that, and I have to constantly check myself not to emotionally react to what Alzheimer Brian is saying to me or what he's doing, because it's not my Brian doing that. But the first time he swore at me, and when Brian got mad at me before, he'd go, "Oh, Pen." I say, "Don't you talk to me like that." And now, he swears at me. And the first time I was literally out the chair ready to like thump on him because you don't talk to me like that. But when we realize it's Alzheimer's, that's not my Brian. So I have 2 categories, and that's to protect myself. So when Alzheimer Brian speaks to me or does stuff like that, I don't respond. Hopefully, I'm not
don't
not
respond.
always
Okay.
not I'm not perfect, but I try hard not to respond, especially with violence. But when my Brian surfaces, then you got to really embrace those moments when my Brian is there, right? And that's the person I need to know that he is down his core. Like our values are very much aligned. The difference with Brian as well is Brian is way more chatty than he has ever been in his whole life. And that's a difference for us. And the difference, he's not working. And unfortunately, right now I can't work either. So we've never spent so much time together.
And we like each other.
And we like each other most times, right? But this is a lot of time that we're spending together that we haven't spent together. So again, we're why we can't work is not good, but the fact that we do have this time together in these early stages, we just have to be intentional about that. And really exciting, we're going on our first trip. We've had 5 days together in a cabin and 2 weekends away in 25 years without children. So we're going to Mexico for 2 weeks on our first trip in April for Brian's 60th birthday. And again, to make that intentional, to make that our time. The grandson's devastated. He's not coming. He's devastated, but
Take grandpa can stay, and he can go next time.
he can go next time. But we don't know. Like, we were going to wait for the trip, but we don't know. And we've just had a significant symptom appear this week that makes us know that our time is limited.
Cool.
Yeah. So Brian said we could share this, but we were out for lunch, and Brian came over really fearful. And it's the first time he's had this situation where he had no idea where he was and no idea who anybody was at the table, which was my mom, my sister, and me. But he knew that he knew me best. So he had hold of my leg, and I was like, "Oh, I thought he was being frisky," but that's not what was happening.
Not at first.
Not at first.
Oh.
Yeah. But it was literally minutes.
Yeah.
But that's not happened before. So we know that's going to increase, and that's now present. So it's going to be present probably in our near future. And how do we navigate that? So we really, our future you can't plan nothing. We don't know how this journey's gonna go. We don't know how much time we have. The lifespan is significantly shortened. So we want to make sure dignity is what's most important. Memories is what's most important. Brian discovered Facebook last year. So he posts every day. Yeah.
Okay, so last January, we were given the privilege of being the honorary family for the northern region. So
Yeah.
I said to Penny, well, maybe I just showed you, but I decided that we had a flag raising ceremony. So I thought, okay, for the month of January, I'm going to go hardcore with little facts, but basically, put it out there, get some friends, and for a month, I was going to do Alzheimer's awareness for a month on my own, right?
Mhm.
Then after a month, I liked it. I really liked it. So then I started posting everything. And then somewhere along the line, I'm not sure exactly where, I realized that it became an incredible memory aid. And I've done I've done quite a few, I've done quite a few things, kind of cool things over the last couple year or so. And what I'm finding is going back regularly and looking at them keeps my memory, even though the really super clear memories are going. At least oh yeah, I do remember that. And it's been amazingly. Penny calls me her. Can I call that?
No. What I call
Yeah.
them shouldn't be said in a public
Yeah.
venue.
I also think that Facebook has been something that helps me in your relationship. Has
Yeah.
helped it,
Yeah.
like
Okay.
the photos and everything.
For a while, she was my photo manager.
But I
Okay.
mean, Christmas is a prime example. Christmas is now faded, for Brian, but he can go back on his photos and his comments on Facebook, and then it helps to trigger it or just to know it did happen.
Yeah, that's what, unfortunately, that it happened is becoming more prevalent.
Yeah.
But it's still there.
So it's like a digital scrapbook in
Yeah,
a
yeah,
way,
that's
and
perfect.
yeah, your memories are there and easily accessible on the phone, and also such a wonderful learning tool for anybody that is following you on your social media pages. And we know that young adults tend to, that's a great source of knowledge, right? Is coming from social media and also from lived experience stories. So people who've been directly impacted by dementia talking about their journey and being public, and like you're doing here today, it's such a powerful learning tool. And when we have young onset dementia in our lives, the occurrence of younger people being in the family network is much greater. And so how do we share our journey with them in an effective way that they can relate to? Okay, well, I've noticed there's been a few questions in the chat, so I want to make sure we have time for them. But I would love to just have an opportunity for each of you to share any closing thoughts. So if there was maybe one thing that you'd most like to share with someone who might be in a similar situation, so each of you have a different perspective of this journey. So whether the individual may have a diagnosis of young onset dementia, or they may be supporting a spouse or a parent or be a friend, what would you like to say to those tuning in? And anyone want to go first?
Yeah.
I'll start because I'm the mouthy one.
Okay.
I just think it's super important that if you have concerns about you or your loved one or even somebody you don't even like very much, that something's happening for them, support them and help them to navigate the system. It's not easy, but also reach out. And if you are the loved one of someone who's struggling, make sure you reach out as well. We did an advocacy with the federal government on how to lessen the burden of Alzheimer's. And I said, one way is to look after people like me. We help Brian to stay home and help Brian to be productive and dignified by looking after the people who love him. And unfortunately, in BC, sometimes we struggle with that, as I'm sure other provinces do. But reach out and, really get your network set up and get your resources set up before you actually need them. Would be my suggestions. What do you think?
Thank you.
just keep communication open, because that's the thing that is going to go first. I mean, and like I because right now this yeah, just keep communication open. I'm starting to get a little wandering, but I think that's the most important thing, and that's on the person. That's on the responsibility of the person with the diagnosis, right?
All of
So
us.
while you're able to share what you really, what is most important to
Yeah,
you
yeah,
with
yeah,
those.
Penny's correct. Like, it's on everyone, but I mean, from you know from my perspective, I need to make sure they know how I feel.
And your Facebook page may be such an amazing tool for the future to look back
And
on all
I
the
have
things
one,
that
yeah,
brought you joy.
I have one or two things on it
per hour.
for
Or,
Uh,
not quite, but
Deanna or Shar, is there anything you'd
uh,
like to say?
I was gonna say, like, from again being your kid, still remembering that you are like that I'm still their kid and not jumping straight into supportive roles because that's not where we're at yet. But like but still being available when that's needed, but still wanting to spend time with them, or mainly dad as my parent in this aspect. But yeah, still wanting to spend time as a child and not just as a supportive person. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that my interactions with Brian and with the family is like life still goes on, and I can be somebody who can be supportive um in that role. I don't really see myself as respite. Um, I see myself as a family member, and that, but I do know that I can play that role, and so where I can kind of step up to be able to help to support, the family, and for Brian just to, keep doing what he loves doing. Um, like I'll be there, and I think that yeah, people need to kind of keep that in mind as well.
Thank you. Everybody's comfortable, we can respond to a few questions. So I think there's already some questions in there. Michael, you've been keeping an eye on the
Yeah,
chat box for us. Have there been any
I've
questions?
got quite a few questions on a couple different categories. A few people had questions related to, at the beginning of the question, related to tax credits. I can just read those quickly, but I also point out that we released our guide for the tax year a few days ago, and I'll link that again in the chat.
Thank you.
The question was, the disability tax credit paperwork stipulates that your Alzheimer's is 60 years or younger. This proposed a big barrier for a 62-year-old. Our clinical team helped us work around this barrier, but I wonder, is there a role for the Alzheimer Society to amend the actual form?
That's an excellent question. Yeah, because what I am aware of and all the information that we have online is 64, 18, between the ages of 18 and 64. And I think that's how we categorize it for research purposes and when we're looking at statistics. So maybe that is a role where advocacy could be needed. I don't know if I can't say I'm an expert in that area though. Any comments? Did you run into any troubles, Penny, when you were doing the
No,
disability tax credit?
no, I mean, we just received approval for it just recently in the last few months.
Okay.
But it was taken back to the year Brian was diagnosed, so we taken back to 22. But from my knowledge, disability tax credit is something I've helped multiple people with. It's more about the functioning level rather than an age level. So when you're diagnosed and we're saying young onset disability, Alzheimer's, it's not about that. It's about the fact you're diagnosed with Alzheimer's and how it impacts your functioning and how much support you require.
Okay. And I believe someone has asked how old Brian was when you were diagnosed, if you don't mind sharing.
56.
56.
I said here off.
I do highly recommend checking out the resource that Michael has put in the chat box. The guide was just updated and is a great resource.
I saw a few questions come in around diagnosis. A couple of people specifically reacted to Brian's mention of the lumbar test. How important is the lumbar puncture test for diagnosis? My husband never had that, but is in a care home now at 63 years old, and I'm still surprised by the diagnosis.
Oh, I'm still surprised by a diagnosis too. I mean, that's something, there are days when I'm like, I have absolutely, anyway, that's again, but no, but
there's days you still don't believe it.
there's days I don't believe it. But with, as far as the lumbar, I'm sorry, Michael, but as far as the lumbar goes, to me, that just was a physical confirmation that there's an abundance of amyloids.
So it's a lumbar puncture.
Yeah.
Right. So for Brian,
nice
and we can only talk about Brian's journey, right? But for Brian, the psychological testing led towards Alzheimer's. That was confirmed by lumbar puncture, which showed an increase in amyloids, which creates the plaques within the brain. But for example, his lumbar puncture does not show tau, which is the next one that causes the tangles in the brain. So he's at a stage where he has high amyloids, but not the tau yet. So for us, we were trying to rule out the multiple concussion syndrome, and the lumbar puncture helped with that because it showed the increase in the amyloids.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, and I know it's not part of everybody's diagnosis process, so it really does depend on what else is going on for the individual as well, and often age is a factor at the time of where the symptoms are presenting.
We might want to say that the psychological testing was a full day event.
Oh, yeah.
Like a full 7 hours event that happened, as well as the MOCA that's done regularly for a lot of people who are presenting with dementia type symptoms. The MOCA is used quite often.
Yeah.
Then I saw a few questions that I've grouped under prognosis. I'm assuming the progression of the disease varies. My husband, diagnosed 2 years ago, seems to be much further along. And someone else asked, does anyone know the average life expectancy post-diagnosis?
Well, I'll answer the first one about further along. I prepare myself fairly to get a lot of rest for these webinars and things, and whenever I'm talking to anybody. So I am a lot, my verbal skills are something that I always took pride in, and they're considerably diminished
For you.
for me. And you know, I mean, I can tell. I know I just said my last answer that I sometimes I don't believe it, but then there's other days that I can't put sentences together. I forget the word for cup or things like that. And so I mean, like it's the progression is there. Progression has been steady. The second part was it the life expectancy. Again, a number of studies. The general thing that we found was 3 to 11 years, and those are with huge variation. Okay, with huge variation, like decades. Some people live decades. So, but those numbers when you first see them, 3, it's like I'm at 3 now. I mean that's startlingly quick. So, but then Penny, our mission has been to live quality. So we don't know, because it might be 3's been pretty good, but then 3 to 4 might not be. So we're just living every minute we can.
Because it's all about for us, 3 to 11 years is average life expectancy, but it doesn't say about quality or dignity. And ours is all about quality and dignity.
Understanding totally to anyone listening out there that there are huge variations on that. We've met people in BC who have lived decades with Alzheimer's disease. Well with Alzheimer's disease.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. There's a lot of variation, and some people will progress more quickly, while others will have a very slow progression. And we do have several people that work with us at the Alzheimer Society who are lived experience partners and share their journey, and they have been close to 20 years living with a dementia diagnosis. So it does depend on the type of dementia, and there's so many factors at play. It's very hard to say, but there's a lot of variation.
It was well as to suggest, and maybe partly is because of my training, is that as soon as it was mentioned that this could be a dementia type illness, I started memory training with Brian like the minute they said that, so we have memory aids within the home, all sorts of memory triggers, training him to wear his GPS tracker, training him to wear his Medi Alert. So we started from the get-go. And he's like, I don't need it. Oh, we're training, so that we could enjoy later on when symptoms start. When symptoms start, that was already a habit for him.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's helpful because it may be a lot easier if you're used to it. It's not something newly that you're adopting at the time when you're struggling with some of those more advanced symptoms. So I like that approach.
Some follow-up questions from that discussion. Does young onset Alzheimer's progress quicker than other dementias? And
I don't know that I can speak to that one. Again, I just from the people that I work with, I know that many people have a slow progression because young onset dementia also, there's over 50 different diseases and conditions that can lead to a young onset dementia diagnosis. It's so hard to say. It can be so varied. We do know some people that progress very rapidly with a young onset diagnosis, but I don't know on average if it's longer or shorter.
And some when you start researching into it, there is a lot of talk that the younger you're diagnosed, the more impact it will have in a shorter time. But there, like you say, there's so many variables, and that's what makes it difficult because we don't know if we have next week, next year, the next decade. We have no clue, right?
Because after diagnosis, I remember being so upset. Like I don't care. Like kind of I wanted brass tacks. I don't care how long I have. I just wanted to know. And I got, oh no, we just don't. And I thought you're what's that? Gaslighting me, right? You're gaslighting me. No, the fact is you don't know. It's because of variations, and I think for me that was a pretty significant development for me when I finally accepted we don't know.
Because you kept saying, nobody's telling me, the doctors aren't telling me, nobody's telling me, and we're like, they can't. Nobody can tell you.
I think that also goes to show the awareness around, because I was sure within a year of diagnosis that I wouldn't have my dad anymore. So I feel like that just also.
Yeah, you just don't know, right? And I just want to say, because you don't know, everybody has a different way of dealing with things. But for us, we chose to take care of the practical things first.
Yeah.
So we chose to do power of attorney. We chose to put everything in my name. We chose to take care of all of that because we don't want to do practical stuff as we journey through this. We just want to enjoy. So that was a decision that we made. And also, we don't want to leave things to chance that Brian is no longer competent and we can't do those things. We wanted to get, so we have his last wishes done. We have the music, we have everything, right? Because we just wanted to make sure that we were prepared as possible for this to go fast. And if it doesn't, that's a blessing, right?
Yeah, good.
And when it comes to planning for the future, I think that's wonderful advice. The earlier, the better. You don't want to miss out on the opportunity for the person living with dementia to participate and to share what's most important to them. So,
I actually keep a list on my phone, and when Brian says, "Do you know, I think at my celebration of life, I'd like this," I'm like, he's like, "Get off your phone." I said, "No, I'm putting it on my list, man." Look, I keep an active list with me for when those moments arise. Right?
And it's not, you know, I just think it's a prudent move. I mean, like, because I certainly don't want like these things like memory aids and doing everything proactively. It just makes sense.
yeah. I believe I saw a question, Michael, around whether or not Brian was driving.
Yeah.
Was-
That's what I was gonna ask.
Did you want to touch on that one?
Me?
Yeah, he's right.
That was
Way to poke the bear.
oh, that was probably of all the for my independence, that was probably the biggest blow I've ever had. I gave up my license voluntarily in September, just past September, and and yeah, it was extremely tough. I I didn't cause I didn't cause any accidents. There was no um what's the word? There was no event.
Directive, right?
There's no event, no directive, but it was just like I just had near the end. I had a general. I you have to be 100. You have to be 105% when you're driving, eh? And I just realized I couldn't be that anymore, and I put it off for a couple months, and then I decided at the end of summer of this last summer I would give it up, and I did. And again, it hasn't been sunshine and roses. I hate the fact I don't have that independence just to go. But what would happen if something happened?
And you know, we have a pretty sick sense of humor in this house, and you know, we don't mean to offend anybody, but we do manage to do that because not everybody appreciates our humor. But you know, Brian would say, the license has to go before something happens because I'll never forgive myself. And I'm practical. You will forget. I will never forgive myself. I'll be left holding that because Brian will forget that that happened. You know, and nothing did happen other than his parking became an absolute nightmare.
Yeah.
Because his distance and his relationship to space was altered, so his parking was like going on like that. But now he's become a fantastic backseat driver and very critical of other people's driving. And the other new thing is,
Well, I had role models for
Yeah.
30 years.
the other thing is, which is new, is road rage, which Brian's not a reactionary person like that, but has actually got to get out the truck to actually engage with somebody in a aggressive sort of way, where it's like, dude, man, get back in the car. And but my mom points out, as soon as you see the size of him, they're going to get back in their car anyway.
Yeah, but driving, it was again, like, this is all personal. For me, it was the right decision to make.
Yeah.
I'm not happy with it, but it is the right decision.
Yeah. And I'm sure, like, Ziana, you've mentioned that you take those opportunities when you're driving with your dad to make moments and
Yeah.
memories. And Shar, maybe that's increased your role too as
Yeah, I lost my designated driver. Yeah, so yeah, I mean it's changed a little bit, but yeah, no, now it's like I'm picking up Brian and going places and stuff, and so yeah, it's okay. It's yeah.
That's just poor planning on their part. Then they didn't
Yeah.
think of that.
I know.
yeah,
There's a few,
it's a hard one though.
It is.
there was a few of us people that go out together that lost our designated driver.
Yep.
Okay, well, maybe have time for one more
Yeah, I
question.
saw.
I don't know, Michael. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, there was just a similar one. How is Brian navigating through technology, e.g., managing his phone, laptop, etc.? What do you use that is not too confusing for you?
Anything I can. I'm tech unsavvy. I think Ziana, it took me probably about hours of over and over and over how to use Facebook
And written tutorials.
and written
was a big thing.
tutorials. Yeah, I've never been tech savvy at all. It's nothing. I'm tech functional at work. I knew I had things, so I use the laptop. I love my laptop. I've just started using a phone, but it's not easy, and I will, if I don't use it for a couple of days, then I have to go back and get a tutorial again from Ziana, say how do I do this? And she goes, well, Dad, let me just do it for you. I said, no, please.
Which was a learning step for me too.
Yeah, I don't want you just to do it. I want to be able to do it, right? It's that independence and stubbornness that we both have, and right. But tech is,
Yeah. I was gonna say, so Brian has a flip phone, which is getting a little harder to get hold of, but has a flip phone, and we're not changing that because that's what Brian's used to. So that's why Brian wears a GPS AirTag, so it's tracked on my phone because
Okay.
because he doesn't have a smartphone.
yeah, it's
Right,
right there.
There he is. He's tagged, right? And that right now, that's more for my sense of well-being because then I know where he is, right? But technology has never been a strength for you.
No, like I say, functional. I did what I learned what I needed to do my job, and but I'm not like if I need something really super technical, I got
And I
her.
think also you started to try to learn more since diagnosis
That's
about
true.
like
have.
what will help you later on.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I will point out there is a whole section in the Young Onset Dementia Hub that has information about using technology, and it has some suggestions for easy to use apps and things like that. So that would be worth checking out. And then for any questions that we didn't answer today, again, I think that is an amazing resource. It goes into much more detailed specifics around diagnosis and treatment options and how what questions healthcare providers may ask, and things that maybe we're not able to speak to today. So it is a wonderful wealth of information for anybody who is either wondering if it may be young onset dementia or has been newly diagnosed. I do recommend checking it out. Okay, there's many thank yous coming in to the chat box, which I love to see. I'm just going to pull up our closing slides. And while I do that, I want to thank all of our guest speakers so much for being here, for being so just open and honest with us and letting us into a little bit of your life story. I just greatly appreciate that. I see that
My pleasure.
reflected in the chat too.
Our pleasure.
Okay. So thank you all for tuning in today to today's webinar. It's wonderful to see so many people from all across the province. And so we are going to ask if you have a few moments to please fill out our evaluation survey. We greatly appreciate the feedback that comes from that survey. It is incredibly helpful in us just knowing what's important to you, what you would like to hear about, what we can do differently. And it's also wonderful feedback for our guest presenters. So I promise it takes no more than 5 minutes to fill out, and we greatly appreciate it. If you're listening in today and you are interested in supporting the Society as a lived experience partner and sharing your dementia story, please do reach out to me. You can email me at livedexperience@alzheimerbc.org, or we also have an online application that you can fill out by visiting alzbc.org/lived experience, and that's also on the bottom of your screen there. And I would love to talk to you about how we can help share your story. And then just a final reminder, if you are in British Columbia, the First Link Dementia Helpline services are available to you from Monday to Friday, 9 a.m. to 8 p.m. at 1-800-936-6033. We also have helplines for the Chinese and South Asian communities available from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. And those living in the Yukon can reach the helpline by calling the toll-free number 1-888-852-2579. Just so everyone knows, we will be putting up a link to the recording of today's session. So usually that's available on our on-demand webpage and our YouTube page within about a week. And we also link the helpful resources document there as well. Just a final reminder to please fill in the evaluation. We greatly appreciate it. And before I say goodbye, I just wanted to note that the Alzheimer Society does have a variety of Breakfast to Remember events coming up. So one in Kelowna, Vancouver, and Victoria. So this is an opportunity for business leaders, healthcare providers, and community members to get together, increase awareness of the disease. It's a wonderful fundraising opportunity for the society as well. There will be guest speakers, healthcare providers, and people with lived experience of dementia. And so I encourage you, if you're interested, to register at breakfasttoremember.ca. And that's the end of our presentation today. So again, thank you to Penny, Brian, Ziana, and Shar so much for being here and sharing your story with us. And thank you to everybody who tuned in today and commented and asked questions. We greatly appreciate it.